Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Alexis, for having me out here in California.
Now, I just want to get to the news that President Obama announced that Iraqi troops would be coming home by the end of the year. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm very concerned because the number one thing is we should have been able to negotiate a status of forces agreement, which would have protected our men and women in uniform over there. And just a few months ago, you heard the military leaders on the ground, the commanders, saying it will require a residual force of 10,000. Then the president says, well, you're only going to get 3,000. Now all of a sudden it's just zero. And of course, when the president made the announcement, the first thing he started off with was saying he's keeping his campaign promise. So I don't want to see this being a campaigner-in-chief decision as opposed to a commander-in-chief decision.
So you think this was more based on political calculus than actual strategy?
I really do. I think that this is once again an instance of him trying to shore up that liberal base, the left-wing base, as he gets ready to head into an election cycle year. But I don't think he's going to get the bump that he expects because it still is about his failing economic policies.
Now talk a little bit about the role of Iran, because as we know, the uncovered terror plot here on U.S. soil.
Sure.
With troops leaving that region, what does Iran do now?
Iran steps it up. As a matter of fact, you will see more belligerence and more arrogance from them. You will see them, of course, once again, continuing to support, probably even strongly, the Mahdi army of Muqtada al-Sadr. It means also that they are going to push themselves as the dominant regional hegemon, trying to make Iraq part of that. Then, of course, Syria, and then over to Lebanon, where you have Hezbollah. So I think that this is a green light for Iran, and we have to be very worried about what could happen some years from now. So in the immediate term, this may seem like a success to the president because he's meeting that campaign promise, but what happens in the long term?
Well, I want to just broaden on his foreign policy, because we were just in Libya for 7 months. He's putting in ground troops in Uganda. I mean, does the president need Congress anymore to approve military action?
No, I don't think he does. And that's the exact one of the things that is very disconcerting for me, is that we have the House Armed Services Committee. We're not made aware of any of these decisions. We're told at the last minute. We saw Tomahawk cruise missiles going into Libya while we were back home on a congressional constituent work break. We find out as we're leaving Washington, D.C., that we're sending 100 special operators into Uganda. He has no regard for the War Powers Act. So I think that his foreign policy is all about being an imperial president.
But how does Congress keep him accountable? Because we haven't really seen that happen.
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing is, number one, we have to have the hearings on it. Number two, we have to cut off the funding. That was one of the things I was really upset with the GOP and why I voted with Dennis Kucinich to cut off all the funding for the Libya mission when we hit that cutoff point by the War Powers Act. And I think we need to look at doing the same thing with Uganda and this Africa mission.
Probably thought you never agree with Dennis Kucinich on anything.
But see, that's bipartisanship. I mean, when people can stand on the right type of principles, which comes back to our rule of law, I'll side with them any day.
Do you think that the president deserves more credit than what he's getting for getting people like Osama bin Laden and Gaddafi?
Well, I will give him the credit for giving the green light, but still it comes down to the men and women that we have on the ground. And the lead from behind aspect of what we did in Libya is not going to be something that we should continue to look forward in the future. And really, NATO is the United States of America. So we can say that we weren't really in charge or taking a lead role, but we actually did. And now I want to see, are this transnational council of government going to pay us back out of those frozen assets that Gaddafi has? Now, the real question is, what's next? Who replaces Gaddafi? Where are the chemical, biological, and shoulder-fired man pads, 30,000 of those rockets that are missing, that we need to recover? Because what we have seen in the aftermath of Hosni Mubarak being deposed in Egypt has not been very good.
Well, you know, we saw the change that Arab Spring brought to that region, but here in our own country, we're kind of witnessing an American Spring with the Occupy Wall Street protest. Now, what's your reaction to the media trying to make this the sibling to the Tea Party?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the Arab Spring was a misnomer. We don't know which direction this is going to go in. Just the same with this Occupy Wall Street. This is something that's been co-opted by the unions, by, you know, the American Socialist Party, the Communist Party, the Nazi Party. So they may have a good intent of coming out to speak out against crony capitalism, which I agree with. We don't need to have the bailouts and things of that nature. But now I think it's morphed into something totally different. And it's definitely not in line with the Tea Party, who are just everyday Americans who went out and talked about fiscal responsibility, limited government that's constitutionally mandated, free market, free enterprise, and national security. I don't know what this movement is going to end up being. As a matter of fact, you just saw in Cleveland, a young woman was raped at one of these Occupy whatever movements.
You know, we had 700 protests, I think, just in one alone in New York. But I want to ask you, because there's a report out saying the standard of living in the United States over the past 3 years has had the steepest decline in the past 5 decades that they've kept track of this statistic. Why do you think things are the way they are? Why is the economy lagging?
Well, what you're talking about is the misery index, which is up to about 13 now. You're also seeing 41% increase in food stamp recipients. 48.5% of Americans are on some form of government aid. The objective of this administration, and truly the objective of the liberal progressives, is to get more people wedded to government, either by subsistence check or employment check. When you hear an EPA that wants to hire 230,000 new government regulators that will cost the taxpayer $21 billion, when you have Harry Reid coming out and saying that we need to hire more people in the public sector over the private sector, that's not how we're going to restore our economy. But that's how they would create a victim class, an entitlement class, a new welfare state that will be totally dependent upon them, that will change national level elections hence and forevermore.
Well, you just mentioned that, but we're facing a big election this next year. What's at stake?
The future and the legacy of this constitutional republic that we love, that I served in uniform to protect. And that's why, even though I've taken that uniform off, I still have just as strong, passionate, patriotic feelings about this country. And this really will determine the next 30, maybe 40 years. Some
of the candidates have put forth their economic plans. I think most famously, Herman Cain has his 999 plan. If that came before you in Congress, would that be a plan that you could support?
Not really, because my concern is that you cannot combine the two forms of taxation. Taxing the American people for their production or income, and then also taxing their consumption. You know, before the time when we brought about the 16th Amendment and we created IRS and personal income tax, we taxed people on their consumption. Then we made the decision that we would tax people based upon their income and their production. We cannot now have a government that's going to tax both, because that would be a heinous violation of what our principles should be. And I think that as you see this thing moving through, the concern is that 999 today may end up being 15, 15, 15 at some later point. So it's very easy, I think, that if we reform our progressive tax code system, we've got to broaden the tax base. If we were to go to a flat tax system somewhere between 13 to 16%, 2 deductions, child tax credit, mortgage interest tax deduction. We want Americans to have families, we want families to have homes. We want a certainty of that tax code, especially for our small businesses that operate as subchapter S corporations. So I think that might be a better solution. Then, when you get the right type of economic indicators, our debt to GDP ratio right now is about 74%. If we can get that down 40 to 45%, we can get the balanced budget amendment. We start to see surpluses and not deficits, especially the $1 trillion plus deficits we have over the past 3 years. Then we can move on to having a consumption-based tax or a national sales tax or fair tax.
Now, not only is the race for the Oval Office important, but also taking back the Senate
huge
as well. But I just want to ask, because, you know, we've seen the Republican Party evolve. It built up government to defeat the Soviet Union. Then we had compassionate conservatism.
Which was horrible moniker, a horrible moniker.
I mean, what does the Republican Party need to do in this election to get back to the roots of limited government?
Well, they need to articulate that message. They need to talk about limited government that is constitutionally mandated. They need to talk about fiscal responsibility. They need to talk about making Americans individually responsible and accountable, and the right type of tax, regulatory policies, monetary policy that promote that. We need to talk about how we will protect our free market and free enterprise system and not be a part of the crony capitalism of bailouts or seeing government become a part of venture capitalism, which is what you saw with Solyndra. We need to talk about traditional values, and we need to talk about strong national defense. That's who we are, those 5 basic points, and that will make the difference. And I think what you see happening right now between the candidates that you have up there, you know, the perception that you have a very moderate Mitt Romney to a very libertarian type of Ron Paul, we got to find a sweet spot in the middle, and people will come to that message.
Do you think we've found that sweet spot yet? I mean, it seems like voters are still looking for that.
They are still looking, and I think that's an interesting thing. A lot of people are just not comfortable with the moderate viewpoint of what they perceive of a Mitt Romney. So therefore, they tried the Michelle Bachmann, they've tried the Rick Perry, now they're trying the Herman Cain. So they're looking for that thing that will give them that comfort and assurance that they're going to have an individual that will lead this country back in the right direction with strong conservative principles.
Now, I know a lot of conservatives out there would actually like to see your name as part of the ticket. I mean, would you ever consider that if that were offered?
Well, let me tell you something. You know, I'm standing here at the Lux Hotel right now 4 years ago this time, I was packing my bags in Kandahar, Afghanistan, getting ready to come back after a 2.5-year assignment. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that if people want me to serve this country, I would pray about it, talk about it with the family, and then talk with our constituents and see if that would be the right decision for us to go forward and do. But I think everyone has pretty much so reconciled themselves to the fact that, you know, folks are looking at Marco Rubio to be the vice presidential nominee, but I am thrilled to be a congressional representative for District 22. But if there's something ahead for me, it'll come at the right time.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much.
Thanks, Alexis.